Last week, the government published this, the National Food Plan. So, a document governing the problems in the food supply at the moment, in particular in relation to how food is produced, how we can protect the environment from soil erosion and depletion and that sort of thing, and of course how our food is affecting our country's health. Now today I wanted to talk to you about some of the conclusions in the report, share some of the statistical data, and maybe offer a few of my own opinions. Now, first off, we're going to get the land management bit out of the way. I am by no means an expert on this with my GCSE in geography, so I'm just going to present exactly what the paper says and say with no further comment. Greenhouse gases. Agriculture, from production to transport to refrigeration to consumption, produces about 20% of global greenhouse gases. Interestingly, the food mile, which has for a while been hailed as a really good way to measure how local your food is and reduce your carbon emissions, that only counts for about 3% of the whole pie, which isn't much. But the largest contributor isn't even carbon dioxide at all. It's actually methane from animal livestock. The interesting thing is that methane is a much more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide, but has a much shorter lifespan in the atmosphere. So what that means is, after about 12 years, once methane's been emitted, it's floated around in the atmosphere for about 12 years, and then it gets broken down by UV radiation in the upper atmosphere, or it falls back down to the earth and gets absorbed by something or other. In fact, to quote the report, if all the ruminants, that's all the grass-chewing livestock animals we have like sheep and lamb and things, if all the ruminants in the world mysteriously disappeared tomorrow, it would take 12 years for all the methane emissions to dissipate. After a couple of more decades, their entire greenhouse effect would have vanished. So on the one hand, that's really good news, because what that means is if we can achieve, say, a small reduction in the size of a ruminant herd, or move away from reducing animals and dedicate more land towards plants, then that would mean we could achieve a disproportionately large reduction in the greenhouse effect, which is good, because I don't want to live underwater. I've seen Busted's Year 3000, and that's not the sort of future I want to live. There's some good news for once. All we need to do is ask the aliens to beam up all of the cows. Another bit of good news is the report says that it looks as though, from the statistics, meat consumption is starting to trend downwards, particularly in the developed world. Now, I've looked at the statistics there. Ta-da! I'm not so sure that looks like a decline. That looks like things levelling off. And as the developing world gets richer and richer, their meat consumption will tend to increase. So I'm not entirely sure that they've got that right, but then again, I'm not a geographer or a animal food expert person, so maybe take it as read that they're right. On a note, when we look at land usage, what they see is that about half of all the land in the UK is being dedicated towards beef and lamb herds. Now that's bad for a few reasons. In particular, all those animals eat, and when they're done eating, it's got to go somewhere, and it's going to tend to roll downhill towards rivers. Similar problem to the use of artificial fertilisers, which roll downhill eventually and end up in rivers. That causes a problem called eutrophication, which is where all those fertilisers and the goodness inside cow leavings first is sort of devoured by plankton and algae and things, which means they form sort of thick scum over the top of the river, which blankets out all the sunlight, so everything underneath the surface dies. So when all your aerobic animals, your fish, your little insects and things have died off, then the anaerobic bacteria will break everything down. Basically, at the end of it, you're left with a sort of desert river where there's hardly any oxygen, there's no life, and it's all a bit poo. So that's bad news. So it stands to reason that we probably want to reduce the total amount of land being dedicated towards that. In addition, the Climate Change Committee, which is a committee in the House of Parliament which sits on important climate change issues, they actually sit on chairs. I mean, they talk about it. They said that in order to achieve the UK's climate change targets, they will need to turn over an area of land the size of East Anglia, or for you Americans, the size of New Jersey, in order to create new woodland. Now, that sounds like quite a lot. It's about 20,000 square kilometres. But fear not, because vegetable production, all the vegetable production in the UK occupies about a space about the size of half of a Shetland Isle. Really not very much space at all. So, if we could slightly reduce the amount of meat being grown in the UK, turn some land over to vegetable production, that should still leave a pretty sizable chunk left over for those woodlands. So it's not all doom and gloom. Similar note, it's about 300 kilograms of carbon dioxide per kilogram of lamb or beef, and it's only about 1 kilogram for every kilo of vegetables produced. Animal husbandry is a really energy and carbon intensive industry, so even just getting rid of some of those cows without even turning land over to woodland would go a long way to hitting some of those carbon targets. So hooray! We're not all going to live on beachfront territory. To summarise, the UK's future food supply is currently threatened by the fact that we're using too much land to raise livestock. We need to transition some of that away from livestock into either vegetable or grain production, and some of that also needs to be set aside for ecological regeneration. Now, the nutrition bit.
Nutrition!
In my last video, I said that something in the region of 30 to 40% of the UK population was overweight or obese. Slight correction, it's much worse. So this report came out and said that the figure last week, so July of 2021, is about 61% of the population are overweight or obese. So half as many, again, are overweight or obese than are healthy. That's a very, very big problem. And in primary schools, children leaving primary schools, in the last video I said that it was about 1 in 5 children who leave primary schools are overweight or obese. Now the figure is 1 in 3. Not good. The paper goes into suggesting a few reasons why this might be the case, and we're going to talk about some of those. There's the food desert problem, things like education, food technology, and some of the addictive natures of certain foodstuffs, which we'll get into all of that. And they also make some recommendations. First of all, the paper makes one quite spicy claim, which is that exercise isn't an effective tool for reducing weight. That is, you can't outrun a bad diet, and they provide some evidence. In particular, they've looked at a study by a chap called Dugas et al. In 2011, which looked at a meta-analysis. So basically, they took all the results from all the papers they could get their hands on, and really dug into them and sort of made one mega study out of all of it. And they looked into the caloric intake and the caloric expenditure of people in highly developed industrial sedentary societies and less developed agricultural manual labour sort of societies. And what they found was that even though there was a significant difference in BMI, that is to say that people in the lower economic areas, the areas that weren't as wealthy, the areas that relied more on your agriculture, your manual labour, your hard graft. People in those places had a lower body mass index, but the caloric intake on average was more or less the same. So that means that us just being richer and them doing more exercise while we're sat on our bottoms eating pies all day doesn't explain the difference. So it must be down to other factors. What are those other factors? Well, let's have a look. Food desert is a term used in the National Food Strategy to refer to areas which are generally economically and socially deprived, and where the residents of that area have a really limited access to good quality food and nutrition. Now, there's a few layers to this problem. So, firstly, in the lowest 10% of areas as ranked by economic status, so think of areas like Grimsby, Bradford, the really poor northern towns, places that haven't seen money since 1987. In these areas, on average, there's about 120 fast food outlets per 100,000 population. In the richest areas, so think your nice leafy towns in the home counties, think certain nice areas of London, that figure was 61 fast food outlets per head of population. In addition, one of the other problems is that when you've got these more densely packed fast food outlets, they also tend to be quite near schools, because parents give the kids £3, go get themselves some lunch, and if the only place you can afford to buy something substantial with that £3 is a fast food outlet, that's where you're going to go. Plus, of course, these kids have had no serious education, because food technology in the UK has been a joke for at least the last 20 years. Food technology lessons. So these kids haven't got the opportunity to buy anything better. Frequently, school meals are just as bad, and these outlets, these restaurants, they're quite aware of this, which is why they're doing things like kids deals. There's photographs in the report of these fried chicken shop windows, which says kids deal, such and such for £2 during the hours where kids are either in or just going to or coming out from schools. A lot of local councils have put laws in trying to say, well, you can't put your fast food restaurant there, or you can't make offers directed specifically towards children. And as we mentioned before last time, the advertising bans, banning advertising for fast food and unhealthy food directed towards kids is no longer allowed. But if these are the only places you can get a meal, then you haven't really got many other options. In addition, there's an even more insidious problem in the supermarkets. Now, supermarkets these days use loads of data and statistics to try and work out what people want, and they've got computer systems that track when the 10th tin of beans or the nth bag of frozen quinoa, I don't know if you freeze quinoa, or whatever it is, has been purchased, and it sends a signal to the computer over in head office to say, right, send Tewkesbury another shipload of however much it is, whatever the product is. And of course, if a product sells particularly well, they say, that brand of pepper sells really well, we're going to send some more to that shop, which means that if you're in an area that's economically deprived, and the cheapest option is food that's highly processed or high in fat, sugar or salt, that supermarket will then over time go, we're seeing lots and lots of this stuff being sold, let's get some more of it in. And so because they get more of it in, it sells more, and so they get more of it in, and it sells even better, and so on and so on. So you can see how this problem gets out of hand. it's not as if anyone's sitting around twirling their moustache going, "Ah, we're going to make people up north fat." Um, it's just economic reality that this is the stuff that sells. On the subject of money, one of the biggest justifications for the whole report um, is given in terms of cost to the NHS. Obesity and diabetes are currently costing huge sums of money to the NHS, and the report predicts that if we don't change something about health and nutrition in the UK, at some point in the next 10 to 20 years, those costs are going to become so huge that they essentially cripple the NHS's ability to provide basically any other service. So we've got to do something about it. The authors of the report, in speaking to doctors, have said that the distribution of funding for the National Health Service seems to be that 95% of money goes into treatment and only about 5% goes into prevention, which is described as topsy turvy. I like the fact that they use the word topsy turvy in an official government document. There are areas of the country where, despite the best efforts of parents and stakeholders at all levels, it is in some cases almost impossible for people in the street to get any sort of healthy, nutritious diet going, and that intervention in schools is viewed as one of the top tools to get in and solve the problem at the root. The report concludes by making 4 key recommendations. 1, escape the junk food cycle, those food deserts that we've spoken about, and protect the NHS by reducing the impact of dietary health problems on NHS funding. 2, to reduce diet-based inequality by making interventions to ensure that people at the very bottom of society get an opportunity to have a healthy diet. 3, to make the best use of our land to ensure that we're able to secure our food supply for the next 200 years, and to produce a long-term shift in our food culture away from convenience, away from fast, sugary, salty, sweet food that pleases our base our biological instincts but does tremendous damage in the long term, and move towards preparing our own food, towards preparing fresh food, towards avoiding the fast food and the convenience and the quick option. On the whole, I think the report is a really good piece of work. I obviously can't comment from any sort of educated perspective on the economics of the geography and the land usage, but the research that I've seen, I've looked into the reference papers, and it's all pretty well put together on the areas that directly impact health. I think are looking really, really good. The proposals are simple to understand. But of course, putting those things into practice is, as always, the difficult bit. Unfortunately, the government has already come out and stated that they don't want to put additional taxes, particularly on things that people in the lower economic strata are eating, because they don't want to make life more expensive for those people already at the bottom. Having been down there, I can understand the reasoning. But the lack of any sort of serious commitment, any sort of, we've commissioned this report, we're going to follow through with it, we're going to follow the recommendations, that's quite concerning, because at some point in the next 10 to 20 years, we need to try and seriously crack this problem of our diet killing us. Otherwise, the next few generations are going to die younger than their parents, they're going to live shorter lives, they're going to live more painful lives, and they are going to cripple the NHS because the sheer volume of health problems coming out from these situations is going to completely swamp our capacity to deal with them. That said, let's be optimistic. We know what the problems are. We've been offered some solutions. Many of these solutions have already been put in place in other countries, and they've been trialled in these other countries, and they seem to be working fairly well. And since we know what we need to do, it's now just a case of the political will. If you're the litigious sort, I would really strongly encourage people to write to their local MPs, write to their local councillors, whoever they may be, whatever party they may be, and ask them to seriously read through this report and seriously commit to those recommendations, those big four recommendations that the report sets out. And I think if we can follow through on those big four, I think this time, 20 years from now, we could be looking back and saying, yep, things aren't perfect, but they're a hell of a lot better than they could have been if we hadn't done anything at all. As always, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate every single person who takes the time to watch through these videos and listen to me rambling. Have yourself a wonderful day. All of the papers that I've discussed are linked in the description below. Have yourselves an absolutely wonderful day, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye bye.